Hi, I'm Hudson Henry. I'm a Portland, Oregon-based photographer. I specialize in landscape, travel, adventure, and also in photo education. And it was really my pleasure over the last couple of months to judge the Right Place and Time photo contest for ViewBug. And they've asked me to come on and talk just a little bit about what I look for in a great photograph, whether I'm looking at a student's photograph or something for publication, or whether I'm really out shooting for myself. What am I looking for in a good composition? What really goes into the creation of a great photograph? And so I'm excited to share that a little bit with you today. And I recently got back from a 3-week trip shooting a bunch of wonderful locations in Europe. And I thought I would go through just a few of my photographs from that trip and kind of use them as an illustration of some of the things that I'm really looking for in my own photography and in others, what really goes into a great image. And I think one of the first key components is good quality light. You know, you arrive in a place that you want to photograph. If you're dead in the middle of the day, high noon, and you want to make a landscape photograph or an architectural photograph, it's going to be tough in those really harsh light conditions. So I shoot a lot around the edge of the day, both at dawn and at dusk, and the hour before dawn, during dawn, and the hour after dawn. That's when the best quality natural light, as many of you know, is filtering through the landscape. And this is an image from Istanbul, one of the first nights that I was there last month. And it was a very clear evening, and clearly there's no clouds and dramatic sky. But in that hour, about 45 minutes after the sun sets, you get these beautiful blue tones that blend really well with human light, you know, with incandescent lights. And this is the Galata Tower. It's a really old tower on a hilltop in Istanbul. It's a really wonderful location, and it gives you another thing that I'm always looking for as a high point in wherever I'm at, to get a lay of the land when I first arrive somewhere. So I went up into the Galata Tower and got this really nice view out over the city. This is actually, I think it's a 9-image panoramic merger that's just a simple handheld merger that I did with my camera up there. It's a pretty crowded spot at sunset and the end of the day, and there's no real way to set up a tripod. But everything in this image is at infinity, which is sort of what I define as a simple panoramic. You could do this with your cell phone. You could do it with any camera that you've got, and there are simple techniques using just Lightroom or other software, Photoshop. There's many others to assemble these panoramics. It's actually a little specialty of mine is doing panoramic mergers, both for enlargeability and to capture wider scenes. And I'm wrapping up a book about that. If you're interested, hit me up, and I'm going to have a free book on simple panoramic mergers and a book for sale on doing more complex ones that require a little more level of detail. And yeah, so just look for that coming soon. And while I was up here, I was able to take some nice detailed shots of some historic locations around the river. And I'm always looking for something interesting in the foreground, in the middle ground, in the background of an image. And again, I'm using that good light after the sunset on this clear night. And this is a really interesting location in Istanbul. This is Hagia Sophia. Was the center of Eastern Orthodox Christendom for 500 years. It's a huge, amazing church. And I got the opportunity to go and tour it. Now it's a museum. It actually traded between Islamic and Christian, Christian, Islamic, and then is eventually in modern day become a museum. And when you go inside, the scale of it is just magnificent. I love these giant doors and all the marble and intricate ornamentation. And in this particular scene, I had my wife walk through the door, just because without that human element to give you a scale of how big this really is, there's no way of really getting a good idea of that. And this is with a 14mm lens. The only way I could really capture it is to go extremely wide. It's 14mm on a full frame camera. But you can see that I'm using, I don't really care if the image is perfectly level or not. I just want to capture the size and dimension of this door. And I kind of like to add triangles to my composition. When I have lines in my composition, I love to see triangles. They're just interesting to me in composition. So I'm always looking for ways to kind of create triangular compositions with things of interest, you know, in the foreground, in the middle ground, in the far distance. And this image really, to me, a person was required for scale to really get an idea of this place. Another really great structure in Istanbul is the Blue Mosque. It's a very, very famous place, and it's often photographed, and I wanted to try to find kind of a different way to get a shot of it, and I noticed in the entry yard to its courtyard there was just this beautiful tiled star mosaic marble floor, and I used that as a foreground, and I just sat up there and I waited long enough, very low with my tripod at again, good light. It's the last sun is hitting the towers here. And I waited until people just sort of saw me as furniture and were flowing around me to capture this photograph. You know, I waited until people thought, that's just some weird guy sitting with his camera, until they started acting naturally and walking around me. And that's one of the keys. And from Istanbul, I had a really good friend who was getting married in Greece, and I went over to Thessaloniki, and we actually were there during this huge economic crisis, which was very interesting. And Thessaloniki is on the mainland and has this beautiful, beautiful public sculpture on its wharf of these umbrellas. And I had my wife grab a hold of an umbrella, and I actually got down on the ground with a 24mm lens and put the sun right in the frame. You know, our new sensors are able to capture so much dynamic range. I find myself making images I wouldn't have dreamed of with film. But getting down low on the ground to have, you know, the base of the poles and the umbrellas up above was just a different perspective. I've seen a lot of photos of this particular art installation, and I was just looking for a different angle, something interesting. So try moving around and getting into different positions with your camera. Look at it from the ant's eye view, which is really what this is. Staying in a beautiful place always helps. If you can find some place that's inspiring to you when you're traveling, or even in your home, if you can create a place that just sort of nurtures your creativity. In this case, this is the place that we stayed on the island of Mykonos, and I found it to be so inspiring. And believe it or not, this is an Airbnb windmill that's really affordable and just a spectacular location to stay. Here's another example of a morning it was really clear. I was out for dawn. There were hardly any clouds. I think about the only clouds in the scene are this one over this mountain that makes it look almost volcano-like. I knew the sun was rising, so I just found something where I could zoom in. There was a little bit of haze. I knew I was going to be able to photograph the sun without it being too intense, and I just waited for it to come up, and I incorporated this church tower and bell in the scene to just use the sun as an element in there. And again, you know, we're looking at foreground, middle ground, distance, and trying to find some things to just put together to capture an interesting scene. We found this working windmill in the town of Mykonos. It's more the main town down on the sea, and it was the middle of the day. One of the things I love to do is to sort of partially obscure the sun behind a building, or in this case the tip of the windmill, and really ramp my aperture up. Here you can see I'm shooting at f/22. I would never shoot this scene at f/22. I'm shooting at my base ISO of my Nikon D810, and I'm down to a 50th of a second. But it's that high ISO that creates that sun star as you start to move it into a partially obscured position. If you put the sun slightly behind a building or peeking out from something and really ramp your aperture up to a very narrow aperture, you'll be amazed at some of the just stars that pop out. Different lenses have different characteristics. Some are very good at this, some aren't good. And I really like this in black and white. A lot of times in the middle of the day when you have a real contrasty scene, black and white just gives you a much more, I don't know, a powerful image. Here's the color version. I always shoot in color and then I post-process into black and white using either Lightroom, or I use a lot of ON1's Perfect Black and White in their Photo Suite 9.5. But in this case, I think I used ON1 software, and I just really like the look. And from Greece, my wife and I went over to Stromboli, which is an island off of Sicily, between Naples and Sicily in Italy. And this was the first morning on Stromboli. There was a beautiful dawn. Again, I'm just focusing in on where the light's really good and filling the frame with something interesting. You know, I could have just photographed the sea, the clouds, and the sun, but putting these sailboats in it gives you a little more something of interest. I'm just looking for anything that's interesting. I have a good friend who photographed for National Geographic for years, and he told me that his editor once told him, I would rather have a photograph of a laundry line in good light than a photograph of the Taj Mahal on a cloudy day. And I think that's really true. It almost sometimes you just need something that's interesting. And this tells a story about the place. There are lots of beautiful boats around Stromboli. And the reason for going to Stromboli is that it is an extremely active volcano. It's a little bit like Hawaii. It's just a mountain that rises out of the Mediterranean Sea, and it pops up there next to Sicily, and it is constantly erupting. And we hiked up at sunset about, I think it was about a 4,000 foot climb, and you get up above it, and about every 20 minutes it goes off and throws these lava bombs and bits of molten lava into the sky, and it's like a Roman candle, and it sounds like a freight train. And this is actually the Mediterranean Sea down below, and boats taking tourists to watch the volcano erupt from the ocean. And you can see I set up on a tripod, and I'm shooting this at 13 seconds. You know, I've got a very low ISO with my camera, and I've got a pretty normal, this is a normal perspective. This is about what it looks like to the human eye from where I'm standing. And just keep that lens open and capture the whole eruption as it happens. It was an amazing place to be. And from there we took a hydrofoil into southern Italy, to Naples, and went down to the Amalfi Coast. And this is actually the just gorgeous little Italian town of Amalfi. It is a beautiful, beautiful place. And on a summer day like this, there are tons of European and tourists from all over the world enjoying these beaches in this beautiful little town and eating the great Italian food. And I loved capturing this scene. And I think one of the things that makes it great to me is the perspective looking down from a highway bridge. You know, I found a place where I could really look down on the scene and get a little different perspective. And I tried to make it so that the coastline forms another of these triangles. The beach and the coastline both kind of have a little bit of a triangle in my foreground composition. And I like the beach stretching from this kind of third point in the frame down to the corner. And I'm hand holding here, but I'm being really careful about framing it that way and keeping everything level. And I liked having the flags up here in the top right to just sort of show the international flair of it and all the color. This is a hike. It's dead in the middle of the day, but we were hiking this just spectacular trail along the Amalfi Coast that goes from way up on this tiny little town you take a bus up to, and then it drops down to this spectacular place called Positano. And along the way, it just reminded me of the cliffs of Kauai's Napali coast. If you haven't been to Kauai's Napali coast, you owe it to yourself to go there. It's a spectacular wild coastline with these cliffs that drop to the ocean. And this place reminded me of that, but with old churches and towns and grape vineyards and little terraced places. And I love these kinds of scenes. I used a polarizer here to bring a little color through the midday glare and to bring a little more definition into these ridges that are stretching into the distance. And I just loved the way the fog was kind of shrouding them, and they come out of the mists and look a little otherworldly. And to me, even this boat seemed like it was in the right place. And once again, you'll see that as I'm composing these compositions, I'm always looking for these triangles in my scenes, you know, and that's partially me, but it's also something I look for in a good photograph. I like diagonal lines running through a composition, or lines that lead me sort of diagonally to the center of a composition, and I'll talk about that right here. Here's a shot from this town that I actually stayed in. We stayed in this little place called Atrani, which is just barely to the south of the town of Amalfi on the Amalfi Coast. And it's another just gorgeous old village. It's almost like a suburb of Amalfi. And here I waited for the dawn. This is an early morning photograph, and I love the way the beach chairs are laid out for all the folks to get out on the beach in the middle of the day. It's like it's waiting for a bustling beach full of families and tourists to get out there and enjoy the water. And I waited quite a bit for the sun here. I think I was out there for about an hour before it actually rose photographing. And again, it's a kind of a boring sky moment. You have that one little moment when the sun rises to really capture something special, and you need to be ready for it. But like I talked about, we've got a line of this coast leading us right into the middle of my composition, and then curving back like an S to take the eye to the sun. I really like to find compositions that lead my eye or the viewer's eye around the frame and make it a little bit more interesting. In this case, this is a really high contrast image, and I'm using Nikon's D810, which is a sensor that has tremendous amounts of dynamic range, but not quite this much. And if you're curious about how I really simply did this, I bracketed it. I shot an image 2 stops underexposed, one image right on the meter of my camera, and then an image 2 stops overexposed. And I used a really simple feature in Lightroom to blend those 3 images together. It's way easier than it sounds like, to get a whole bunch more dynamic range to adjust this image and get all this tonality. And I've written a little blog post about that on my blog. If you go to hudsonhenry.com, over to my blog, and you look through, you can search for Lightroom Amalfi, but Lightroom 6 is the name of the post. It was on July 14th. It's right near the top right now, but it talks a little bit about how you would do that, and it shows the images that I used. It's really quite simple. So if you're interested in that, hudsonhenry.com, the blog, it talks a little bit about how to use some of the new features of Lightroom 6 to do some simple stuff like this, but that's fun and really, really powerful. From Italy, we moved over to Paris. And again, you know, I had a lot of skies that just didn't have a lot of cloud, and I'm a big lover of cloud and landscape and cityscape photography, like we all are. When you don't have clouds, you've got to do interesting things with the sun and with the hour after the sun and with people and other objects of interest. In this case, I started out over on this bridge looking at Notre Dame. This is the famous Notre Dame in Paris. And I ran out onto here, onto the island, and was looking for a composition, but this hedgerow was really in my way. And then I turned, looked back, saw the next bridge back, and a more experienced photographer back there with his tripod. I thought, huh, he has the idea. So I ran back around as the sun was setting, got back to this next bridge up the river, and got this great composition. And as the sun came from over here and slowly sank down, moving to the right, I just kept moving my tripod until I got to the point where, as it set, it's partially obscured. And once again, I use a really, really, really narrow aperture. I went up to f/22. I was shooting with my Nikon 70-200 VR2 lens, which does a really good job with sunstars. And I just put that sun right where I wanted it. And again, this is another one of those images where I bracketed 2 stops underexposed, 2 stops overexposed, 1 right on the meter, and used that function in Lightroom that I talk about in my blog post. Another thing you can do in clear kind of light conditions, find interesting subjects. This is my wife, who I love to photograph, Stacy. I would say never be afraid to take a photo that's even a cliche. You know, there's nothing wrong with taking a photo that's oft been photographed. This is in the Musée d'Orsay. This clock is a very famous photograph, but I saw an interesting Parisian walk up and stand in front of it. I loved her hat. The clouds were amazing that day. I love recreating an image that a great photographer has taken, and one of my favorites. I took a little side trip down to Normandy, or over to Normandy, rented a car, and I was so excited to shoot Mount Saint Michel. It's a location that's kind of on my bucket list. I've always dreamed of going to, and it's this island on the Normandy, on the coast of Normandy. Spectacular, ancient location. It was one of the more fortified points along the French coast. It was basically never conquered that I know of, and I really wanted to capture it at sunset. Got a great image at sunset. I love it. This is another panoramic merger. I didn't have to use a panoramic technique, but I wanted to just have more enlargeability. As you can see here, as I zoom in, it's a really big file, and it takes Lightroom a little bit of time to even build a full resolution preview. I thought I had one in here, but I guess I don't. I don't know if I'll wait for that or not. Oh, there it is. You can see just what level of detail you can get doing these panoramic mergers. Which is why I love doing them, and I've done so many of them. But the really great image that I got was actually after the sunset. The lights came on there. I found a spot out in the tidal flats that was reflecting. I avoided some quicksand. They actually have man-eating quicksand out there, believe it or not, so you got to be a little careful if you go to this location. But again, I've got some diagonal lines running here, and I have a line taking us into the composition with this tide pool, and I've got more interesting color after sunset than during this particular sunset because the clouds didn't change color. And the last couple images I'll tell you about were from Bastille Day, just like a week ago, downtown Paris. Found a location away from the masses, up on a hill that overlooked the Eiffel Tower, and you can use Google Maps and Street View and just research the internet and find a place where you want to be. But the Bastille Day Eiffel Tower fireworks are a thing to behold, and it was pretty neat. As we set up in this location, right before the fireworks went, they used modern projector technology and lit the tower different colors as if it was painted. The crowd went wild, and then the fireworks started, And if anyone's interested in photographing fireworks, I think that you want to be somewhere between a half a second and a couple of seconds, and you really want to be at the beginning of a fireworks show, because especially one with a recognizable structure, like I wanted the Eiffel Tower to be a part of this image that I was capturing. The minute that the fireworks get too intense and the air fills with smoke, your background just fades to a smoky background, and all you can really get are the starbursts of the fireworks. So in this case, I really wanted to get a good image right at the beginning, and it's always a little bit of luck, a little bit of getting in the right place and having everything set up and ready to go when the fireworks start, and then you need to capture that perfect instant early on before the cloud completely, the smoke cloud just completely obscures your sight. So those are some little tips and tricks from my part, utilizing some images I've created over the last few weeks. Again, I just loved running the ViewBug contest. I'm excited to do some more, and the ViewBug folks are excited to do some more with me, so look for more contests from me in the future. On my website, hudsonhenry.com, if you're interested in learning more from me, I have a newsletter that you can sign up to. Every couple weeks I just put out news about workshops, little tips and tricks, just fun stuff. I don't try to inundate you in any way. I've got Facebook, I'm on Twitter at @HudsonPhoto, @Hudson_photo, and I'm on Instagram too, Hudson.Henry. So look for me there. I hope to see you soon, and I'm excited to run some more photo contests. Thanks everybody.